agency that you represent, starting on the right.
Hi, I'm Phil Henderson. I work with Mountain View Wisman School District as their legal counsel.
Thank you.
Rebecca Westover, the CBO for MVWSD.
Nellie Meyer, Superintendent, Mountain View Los Altos High School District.
Mike Matheson, Associate Superintendent for Business Services from MVLA.
Emily Ann Ramos, Mountain View City Council.
Catherine Vonnegut, trustee, Mountain View Los Altos High School District.
Bill Lambert, trustee, Mountain View Wisman School District.
Ellen Kamei, Mountain View City Council.
Theta Corns, Mountain View Los Altos High School District trustee.
Devin Conley, Vice President of the Board for Mountain View Wisman School District.
Lucas Ramirez, Mountain View City Council.
Bill Felice, Mountain View Los Altos Union High School District President, Board of Trustees.
Allison Hicks, Mayor of Mountain View.
Laura Ramirez Berman, Mountain View Wisman School District Board President.
Pat Showalter, Mountain View City Council, Vice Mayor.
Laura Blakely, trustee, Mountain View Wisman School District.
Lisa Matichak, Mountain View City Council. Esmeralda Ortiz, trustee, Mountain View Los Altos.
Chris Chain, trustee for Mountain View Wisman School District.
Kelly Bowers, facilitator, excuse me.
Luke Jensen, also facilitating with Kelly.
Audrey Ramberg, the City of Mountain View and Shoreline Community.
Kimbra McCarthy, city manager.
Jennifer Logue, City Attorney for the City of Mountain View.
Heather Glazer, City Clerk.
Thankfully, members of the public do not have to remember all those names because we are labeled. So we'll now move to item 3.1 on your agenda, the joint agency meeting to build relationships and share perspectives regarding the Education Enhancement Reserve Joint Powers Agreement, also called the EER-JPA.
And I believe we did have one person who just joined us. If we could have Dr. Rudolph introduce himself as well.
Dr. Rudolph, Superintendent of Mountain View Wisman School District.
I'm Luke Jensen. I'm a senior analyst at the Rennie Public Management Group. I work with Kelly and have been working with her on this project since we were engaged. And I'm excited to be here tonight and appreciate the opportunity.
not a problem at all. It's also an opportunity for our elected officials to hear from each other. And what that doesn't mean is that every single person is going to be talking the entire night because we have a shortened period of time. But you're still talking to each other and you're going to be able to listen to each other because we've been able to synthesize from the meetings that we have had. So you'll indirectly be sharing as well. When we share the insights, they didn't come from us. They are synthesized and analyzed and then shared with you. So you'll still be hearing and listening to each other as elected officials. This is a unique opportunity. You'll also be able to discuss some of the things we have in common. Often when we have challenges and areas where we disagree, we don't always realize that we have many, many things, even more in common. And that's how you build relationships. You focus on what you have as common ground. We'll be able to establish some norms and ground rules. You were very free in sharing some great rules of thumb for how to conduct ourselves and how to establish some ways and norms for interacting that will take us forward and will also set great groundwork and rules for the ad hoc committee. And even more important, we'll be able to share some of the considerations that have been co-created and ideas that have come up, and they're not limited. New ideas may come to you this evening, and that will help us move forward. Just want to remind what it is not negotiations. I'm not an attorney, thank goodness. No offense, I know we have many attorneys here, but it's also not a town hall. So we do have public who would love to speak to you and care about our community here, but it's also just not a free-for-all open mic. So we would just ask that everybody, make sure that we behave and comport ourselves with respect for each other. We also do have a parking lot, and it's not the real parking lot. It's an imaginary one that Luke will be monitoring. And there's two ways to look at that. When you have a meeting such as this, often people will leave and then they go into the parking lot and they say things that maybe they should have said here. Well, so first of all, we'd like you to say things here. You can still digest and rewind in the parking lot, but we don't want you to feel as if something should have been said that was stifled. So we do hope that you feel comfortable sharing here. But also we may end up touching on something, some kind of concept that doesn't quite fit in our focus. And if it leans toward one of those items, then we'll put it in the parking lot, again, to respect and listen to you, to note it, but it would be for future considerations. It might be part of the ad hoc committee work or elsewhere. And most of all, we ask that all of you just come in with an open mind and a spirit of wanting to work with us to move things forward. And we really do appreciate that collaborative intention that we have experienced with every single one of the people we've interacted. And before I go on, I did want to share just a little bit more about how people were feeling about this meeting. People were very candid when we met with them. There was a range, and you all fall in somewhere in that range. Some were anxious, some were skeptical, some were excited, and most people were in between. Cautiously optimistic, but not quite sure. And the reason is because this hasn't been part of your history. This hasn't been something that we normally do. And some communities do. It may be something that you decide that you like, or maybe something that you decide we don't need to repeat. But regardless, however you came to tonight, I hope that you leave in a better place. I hope that you feel more positive about breaking bread with each other, having interaction, and listening and attending to other perspectives besides our own. And with that in mind, I would like to ask you to pick up your glass of water. And this is just an easy thing to do. We're all picking up a glass of water. Does anyone know where I'm going with this? Most people usually think it's the half full and half empty, but actually it's a little different. I would like to ask you to estimate how heavy that glass is. Any guesses? See, all the analytical people, they're really figuring it out. Okay. So the reality is it's not very heavy for most of us. But now if I asked you to hold it the rest of the evening, it would start to get a little heavier. And what if I said, let's hold it for a month? Let's hold it for a year. Let's keep on holding that glass. Suddenly the same glass that doesn't feel very heavy, the same glass that you can just pick up and hold all by yourself without depending on anybody else begins to be a heavy load. And one thing that I learned from meeting with so many of you is that people have been carrying a heavy load. Part of it's being an elected official. That is not an easy task. Part of it's being a staff member for a very high performing community. But a lot of it is because we want to get things right. So as hard as it has been to carry that load, I wanted to raise my glass and salute you for trying and let you know that my job as a facilitator is to help carry that load, to help put some of the burden on my shoulders so that I can help us move forward. But it's also time for you to look around and see that there are many, many people here who can also help lighten that load and share and carry the burden. Not that being and working, being an elected official is a burden, but there's a huge responsibility and you take it seriously. So we're going to share the burden. We're going to carry the water together. And hopefully when you leave tonight, your load will feel a little bit lighter. And then I believe we're going to talk a little bit about where we've been. So I mentioned a journey. And so just most of us know about the Shoreline community. But before we get there, there was a quote that I wanted to share. Never rest on past success, create something better. And that's kind of my challenge, is we've had great success and we know that we can do things successfully together. There's a history of that that's been documented, but we also know that this is an opportunity to create something even better through the next steps of this process. So I'm just going to make sure that we all have the same background. And this came from Luke and my own research. So we'll go to the next slide. So the Shoreline community, it was created in 1969. So I think I was like 4 years old then. I don't know how many of us were around, but the reality is there is this long tradition, and it was a special park district, very unique, and it had very specific purpose that was defined to develop and operate the regional parks, to enhance the area economically as well as environmentally, and to add the housing. It is a separate legal entity from the city legally, but we do know that there is cross-section because the Shoreline directors also are functioning the city council members. We also know that it receives special property tax revenue, and through that, there are annual contributions. They're going to the districts, to the schools, through the Education Enhancement Reserve Joint Powers Agency. These are all things that we've come to know. So that those contributions are continuing. The first agreement was in 2005, and the amount was about 400,000, or was 400,000. In 2019, then there was a new portion of that was amended. And so a full tax rate allocation on any new residential development also began to be part of that. And so where we are now is the current agreement operating under has these annual contributions. So our Mountain View Wisman School District is at 6.4 million. On our Mountain View Los Altos, I sometimes hear Union High School District is at 4.3. But we also know that there are many areas we still need to explore relative to that. And so we're committed to negotiating a successor agreement with our next steps. But that brings us to where we are. That was the history. I was not a history teacher, so I was an English major. So we'll go to the next slide. We have quite an audience here. We know that all of you have shared a lot and that we'll begin to share more, but it's really important that we all understand our public is listening, our public is watching, and our public cares. It's not about the city and the district and this district. It's about our community of Mountain View. And we need to begin to co-create and work on things and attend to those who listen. The roles you're in, I always say, is like a fishbowl. You can't really hide. You're here and everyone is watching and scrutinizing and sometimes judging. And that's part of that burden that you carry, but it's also part of the joy because you're doing everything transparently and openly and you listen to your community. So we're going to give them that opportunity and we'll listen.
So thank you, Dr. Bowers. We're now at the period when members of the public, either joining us virtually or in person, can provide comment on the item on tonight's agenda. If you are virtual, please click the raised hand button in Zoom. And if you're here in person, please submit a blue speaker card to the city staff table in that direction. We will take in-person speakers first, and each speaker will have 2 minutes.
I'm going to apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name, but first we'll hear from Rani Fisher.
Good evening. My name is Ronnie Fisher, and I'm a member of the Environmental Action Committee of the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society and also a resident of Sunnyvale. Please do not reduce funding for Shoreline Regional Park because the park needs consistent maintenance and protection from the many visitors who can disrupt the quiet, startle wildlife with noise and movement, and have been known to trespass on sensitive habitat. Furthermore, the park needs protections from sea level rise, landfill operations to ensure that greenhouse gases do not escape the landfill, recreation and educational opportunities, and general upkeep of the park that is visited by millions of Bay Area residents every year. They visit because they crave wildness, as do I. I crave keeping my fellow creatures like burrowing owls and black skimmers safe. And I hope that you will preserve funding for habitat. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Mary Buxton.
Good evening, afternoon, whatever. Anyway, thank you for giving an opportunity to comment. I work on 30 by 30 campaign, which is statewide campaign to conserve 30% of land and water by 2030. And this park is a gorgeous multi-purpose park that provides equitable access. It has lots of habitat for wildlife, and it's also provides nature for children, and children, you know, you've all probably read about the nature deficit. So I'm busy trying to get more parks and more wildlands. And so I hope this funding for this park can be maintained. One of the themes that's really common in 30 by 30 is ongoing stewardship of property that gets conserved. And I think there does need to be adequate funding to meet the challenges as well as maintain the beautiful level of community service to animals as well as people. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Jesse Cup.
Hello, everybody. So I'd like to see this funding spent on protected bike lanes in this area to make it safer to get around and make this a really car light area of the city and enhance the active transportation of this area. So that includes making it walkable, making it bikeable, building public transit out that people actually want to use. So that means well shaded, maybe there's some public art along the routes, benches, things like that, trash cans. And this is also, we've heard a lot of nature comments. We'll probably hear a lot more, but this is also a place where people live and many more people will hopefully live. So that, you know, includes high density housing, hopefully, and affordable housing that I'd love to see more of. And green streets will enhance everything that I've just mentioned. So that's going to make it safer for pedestrians and cyclists. People taking public transit, it's going to slow down the cars, provide shade, help the wildlife and the native life. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Cliff Chambers.
Thank you. I'm Cliff Chambers, and I'm one of the caring residents of Mountain View. I'm also a parent of an 8th grader at Crittenton. I'm really asking the City Council and the Board of Trustees to really work collaboratively together to establish a decision-making framework for a successful long-term success or EEER. JPA agreement. It's going to take really strong leadership from both the city council and the board of trustees to make this happen. And simply the stakes are too high not to be successful. Why are the stakes too high? First, the Shoreline Park is really a gem for the city. It's very well utilized by children, teenagers, adults from Mountain View and other places for walking, hiking, just enjoying the sunshine. And we've got a threat of sea level rise. We need to use some funding for that. So we need to have a really good funding approach for those. Second, past city councils really let the jobs, housing imbalance get away from itself. And we spent years developing the North Bay Shore precise plan and successor master plan. And we really need the funding to transform the area into the vibrant mixed-use development that we really all envision, including 10,000 homes and a 4-acre school site. The EER-JPA really must provide the funding to enable this vision to happen. And finally, as the housing is built in North Shoreline, there's going to be need for facilities for school children and for schools, and we really need to have the funding. So you really need to balance these 3 priorities to make this work, and I hope you can do that in a very constructive and collaborative way so that we can be proud of our elected officials. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Jim Zaorski.
Very much. I welcome Dr. Bowers and her help in this issue. As a citizen that has been involved in this issue for most of 3 years, I heard at the meeting on Tuesday at the council that we don't have to like each other in order to have a solution. But I do believe we have to trust each other. And I think trust has been broken in a lot of ways with both the community and with the council and with the district. And I think in order for us to have a real solution that we can take care of the gem that is Shoreline Park, that we can make our school systems the best that we can be, which is just as important to the citizens, that we can protect, build a city of the future that is not like a suburb or an exurb of some other place. We need to start small. We need to start developing trust. We need to reach out. And I thank Dr. Bowers for participating in this and bringing her expertise. And I wish you every success, but I think we don't put the bar too high and we just look at ways of developing trust. I met with Dr. Rudolph about 2 weeks ago, and I said, a real solution is going to be one that nobody likes. But before we agree to a solution that no one likes, we have to trust each other. And that's where I think we have to start. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Celia Paymer.
My name is Celia Paymer. I'm a resident of Mountain View, and today I'm speaking as a resident of Mountain View and as a parent, not from my career side. One of the things we've been seeing in the news from Mountain View Wisman School District is that they really need this funding to provide quality services to our students. They pitch we can only reduce class sizes if they get their share of this tax fund, and they're the best organization available to direct those funds to our children, and I have 2 of them at Bub. The myth of this narrative is that the Shoreline Communities Tax Fund is not currently going to our children. These funds are being spent on mitigating rising sea levels for our children, protecting endangered species for our children, and help support the city's general fund, which also provides services to our children. I know that my children enjoy many of the city's family events. They go to the camps. When we were looking for preschool day camps, the city options were often the most comprehensive. One of the most important things, though, is I feel the city takes our input on how to improve their services and actually funds and implements them. Conversely, we've had some challenging times with Mountain View Wisman during community outreach that is usually once during working hours at Thursday at 4 p.m. For advice on topics. And then when we give advice, none of it is actually implemented. So I would rather support the organization that hears from the community to support our children instead of one that has decided that kids are no longer allowed to play on campus after school unless they pay for the privilege. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you for your time.
Next, we'll hear from Alex Brown.
Hi, extended friends. Okay. So far, facilitation seems very nice, chill. I was hoping for robust negotiations tonight, maybe with some physical challenges or duels. I feel like that might get us to a resolution much faster and be more fun for the audience. I do value education. I do. I just want the education as someone who lives in North Bayshore not to be emergency swim lessons because we failed to maintain the levees. I'm not doing this for you. I am doing it for you. Okay. On a rare serious note, I would much rather have all of these discussions be grounded in something more material via proposed budget items instead of vague illusions that establish a false dichotomy between children and the environment. I think, we could do that. We can say, here are the things we need and how much they're probably going to cost. Let's start there instead of eventually getting there. In the meantime, being like, think of the children. All right. Thanks.
Next, we'll hear from Shawnee Kleinhaus.
Good afternoon. My name is Shani Kleinhaus. I'm the environmental advocate for the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. Our organization has been involved with advocacy for wildlife and for environmental benefits in Mountain View for many years. We have a lot of members in Mountain View. Our education program reaches every fifth grader in the Wiseman School District. We provide in-class programming to all the district elementary schools, introducing students to concepts such as adaptation, local conservation, habitat, our species, local ecosystems, and birds, and we use a lot of local case studies. We help students foster a sense of appreciation and understanding of the complex habitats that we're surrounded with here. And it's really, really critical that they also have the chance to experience those habitats, to go out to nature, to come to the park. And we have a lot of programming for adults and for children at Shoreline Park. So we reach thousands of people every year in Mountain View. And I think it's really, really critical to understand that for children, knowing that there are animals there and knowing that they exist. And if you ask them, do you want to have 5 more friends in your classroom or do you want to save a species? I think I know what they're going to tell you. And I think we should listen to that. We have some brochures about the birds of Shoreline, which was produced in the early 90s, and one on endangered species here that was produced in the 80s. Some of the species that we have in the 92 birds of Shoreline are no longer seen here. Quail, think about when those of you get that far. When was the last time you saw a quail or a pheasant here? So we do need to take care of this place. It's special. It's really, really special, and it needs very special care. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Matthew Reed.
Good evening, Matthew Reed. I'm the Director of Policy at Silicon Valley at Home. We are an affordable housing and housing advocacy organization working in Santa Clara County. And I've had the honor and privilege of being involved in the North Bay Shore planning process for as long as I've been an employee, pretty much from the beginning. So it's my pleasure to be here. I think from the beginning of this process, we knew that there were a lot of challenges of balancing all of the different needs of the community, of the city, in bringing together this plan. And I think there was a shared commitment to finding that balance in a way that ensured the best possible outcomes for the neighborhood that was going to be built. For us, this was really about making sure that members of Mountain View community that are struggling right now to afford to live in this city have access to the new communities in North Bayshore that are going to be built. Part of that is having access to the full amenities that were in the plan. The richness of the investments in the environment, the sustainability of the area. And so we just hope that we would keep in mind that there are real interests that are going to be a part of this community that there aren't simple answers, but it's really essential that we ensure that the investments that Mountain View makes are in the value of creating equitable opportunities for folks who are really desperately needing the support that this community will be offering. Thank you.
That closes in-person public comment. Now we'll turn to Zoom and hear from Robert Cox.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks for this opportunity to comment on the allocation of Shoreline District funds. Over the last few months, the school district has voiced concerns that as Mountain View population grows, a greater percentage of Shoreline District funds should be allocated to the school district to support the growing school-age population. While all of us in Mountain View want the best education for our children, I believe how much needs to be allocated to the schools should be based on actual growth in school population and not just projections. While the last 7 years have been a time of great Mountain View housing production, the school age population has actually declined 13%, while funding for the student per student has more than doubled according to postings on Balanced Mountain View. The Shoreline Fund currently supports several important current and future projects, including maintaining a park and wildlife refuge, protecting against sea level rise, and transforming North Bay Shore into an area that will support much of the housing growth in our city. Funding for these must not be compromised, so let's find a way to accommodate what the schools actually need while still maintaining our current shoreline obligations and plans. Thank you. I cede my time.
Next, we'll hear from Deshelle Leeds.
Hello, my name is Dashel Leeds. I'm the Conservation Coordinator for the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. As Shani and other previous speakers have said, Shoreline Park is important for wildlife and local biodiversity. Shoreline Park is a model for how to manage access, providing recreational opportunities while allowing sensitive species to live and thrive. The Shoreline Park Community Fund provides essential funding for this and many other important services, functions, and programs, such as other speakers have mentioned sea level rise adaptation, nature-based infrastructure, and controlling emissions from the landfill. This and many important ecological, climate, and adaptation actions should be protected. As you move through this process, we hope to protect and continue funding for implementing the plans that support wildlife, wildlife education, and park maintenance. So please do not reduce the funding for Shoreline Park. Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from Craig Fisk.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'm Craig Fisk. I'm a software CEO in San Jose, actually. I've done a couple of startups and I previously was at Intel. I've been enjoying the nature environment at the Charlton Slough in particular. And I'd like to see the funding maintained at the same level or perhaps increased. And I'd like to see the cities actually take efforts to reduce the ecological footprint of people in the area. Thank you. I'll see the rest of my time.
Next, we'll hear from Susan Desjardins.
Hi, good evening. I'm Susan Desjardins. I'm the chair of Sierra Club Loma Prieta's Bay Alive program, which is committed to protect San Francisco Bay. I'm also an enthusiastic Bay Trail user. Shoreline Park is a very special place. It's an important asset for not only Mountain View, but for the surrounding communities. Please do not reduce funding to Shoreline Park. Shoreline Park is critical wildlife habitat, and it's where the city of Mountain View will encounter sea level rise. Shoreline Park is one of the few places for critical wildlife, such as the burrowing owls, and where many enjoy hiking and biking on the bay. I am also a former teacher and I value education, but it's not at the expense of maintaining our parks. Thank you for this opportunity to make public comment.
Seeing no other speakers, that concludes public comment, Mayor.
Okay, thank you all very much. I will now turn the facilitation of the meeting back over to Dr. Bowers.
Thank you, Mayor Hicks. So I did just want to reiterate, based on the comments that we heard, that tonight is not for negotiations, but we are setting that groundwork. We will be negotiating a successor agreement. And the purpose of tonight's meeting is to establish that trust and start the relationships and build that framework so that those negotiations will be successful and will come out better. But I also wanted to just share with you something of what I sense is going on. And I used to teach and debate, and I also used to teach journalism. And one of the things that we always worked on was the other side of the coin. And so we often are finding ourselves hearing different versions and different points of view, and even different data is being shared. And that's perfectly normal, but we can't be surprised by that. What we need to understand is when we are working through things, often our role is almost like being an umpire. We're going to take our information, we're going to make those calls, we're going to make those decisions. And depending on perspectives, some people will say they got that call, and others will say, what were they thinking? They missed it. And so we really have to find in ourselves to do our best, put our best self forward, take in information, ask questions, question answers. And then as we go forward, we'll have the best pieces of information that we can to make those decisions. And that will be something that we'll have to carry forward. But I do appreciate the fact that our community is so passionate and wants to help guide where things are going. I don't want them to feel ignored at all. What we have done is place those things in a parking lot, not to minimize it, but just to say tonight is not about negotiations, but certainly many things that were shared will have bearing going forward. So speaking of going forward, we went through the past. We heard from people now. We want to talk a little bit about where we are. And I want you to think about something that people will support what they help create. And so that's why we're definitely focusing on co-creating. Are we going back to the slideshow or the PowerPoint? Okay. So as we go into where we are now, I have some thoughts and quotes for you to ponder. One is, successful leaders see the opportunity in every difficulty rather than the difficulty in every opportunity. And also, in the midst of every crisis, there is an opportunity. And so I wouldn't say that we're in an emergency crisis, but I would definitely say that we've hit some roadblocks and there have been some tensions. And so basically we can't dance around that. We have to acknowledge it. We have to be pragmatic. We have to be realistic. We're not in the place that Mountain View would like to be as a community, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to get through it. And so what we wanted to start with was some of the norms and ground rules that you yourselves have come up with and shared so freely. And if you didn't have an opportunity to meet with me, and if something else comes to you, then we would also like to hear that. But these are some of the norms and ground rules. Remember, norms are how we treat each other, and ground rules are the rules of thumbs and the protocols for how we will interact. And so what I'd like you to do, rather than only listen to me, I'd like you to go through this, and you have a copy at your place as well. Read through them, take them in. They came from your counterparts. Some of them came from you. And then we are actually going to go around the room and ask each of you to pick just one and share just one that really has a lot of meaning, that you would think could make a difference going forward for not only this meeting this evening, but for the ad hoc and for any of our interactions. Which one would you hang your hat on? There's actually another one. So you can look at both. The audience will have to kind of toggle back and forth a little bit. And if you're compelled to say two, it could be the one that we need right now and the one that we need going forward. If there's one that you don't understand or want to hear more about, we can also do that. But if anyone is ready, then we'll just start with whoever turns their green light on.
Well, I can start with leave historical baggage at the door and focus on the future and outcomes. I mean, I like a lot of these. I don't think we can use one alone, go forward with one alone, but I think that, I think that there's great potential for collaborating and that we can produce better things if we collaborate and maybe we just put history in the past.
Thank you. And we did acknowledge history, but this would be moving forward. Next, anyone else?
So I'd like to, thank you, Lucas. I'd like to take avoid placing blame and look for opportunities to collaborate. I'm reminded of a CEO who said something just like that. Before he became CEO, I think it was of General Electric, but I'm not sure, he was making a presentation. And in the course of that presentation, several people in the audience started saying, well, this was because so-and-so did that. And he said to them, I'm here to fix the problem, not to affix the blame. And I think that was a key insight, that we're not going to look to pin the tail on some donkey. We are here to solve a problem. And I actually think we are here to balance interests among many problems. So thank you.
Thank you. No blame, no shame. Next.
I would go with embrace possibilities for compromise because, as we talked about earlier, not everybody's going to get everything they want. So, and the two C's go together, collaborate to come to a compromise that everybody can have some of what they need and all needs can be met to some extent.
Thank you. Yes.
I'd go with reflect critically and think creatively.
Yes.
I like to provide clear agenda items, goals, and objectives. I think it's a really great way to set expectations, not only for all of us, but for our public and those who wish to participate and engage. The clearer we are, the better it will be for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was also learning that as I was creating my agenda, I needed to clarify again. So I appreciate your patience with that.
I would go with take the high road, especially as someone who represents high school children. It's very important that I take the high road when I'm at meetings, whether it's with Phil and the negotiating team or in this public meeting. It's my responsibility as an elected official that I take very seriously.
Thank you. And when we had our intakes, some people said that that can be challenging, but they would still commit to it. Thank you.
Like Trustee Lambert said, I actually also like the reflect critically on your own position and think creatively about what might be possible. I always had a running mantra that as long as there's air in your lungs, there's possibilities are endless.
Thank you.
The last one kind of reminded me of what I said the other night at the council meeting, and that was agree to disagree. I don't think we are ever going to completely agree on data and information, and I don't think we should try. I think we need to respect that the city's the expert on city data, the school districts are the experts on the school district data, and that we should come up with an approach to this issue that doesn't rely on us completely agreeing on data. Thank you.
Thank you.
I like a lot of what my colleagues have said, but so I'm going to pick another one, which is recognize and respect each other as equal partners in this process. And I think that speaks for itself.
And yes, the idea of a joint agency was a little bit foreign to some coming to the table, but realizing that we are all here together and reinforcing that. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna add a new one here that hasn't been shared. Move from judgment to curiosity, try to understand and empathize with the challenges and priorities of others. So what's critical for you may not be as critical for me, but I do think in this process that it's important to understand both sides so that we can compromise and reach a solution.
There's a few voices we haven't heard from. This is your opportunity.
Hi, I would like to talk a little bit about the no surprises, no blind sides. I think that it is true that the trust between our institutions has been eroded. And I think we owe it to the people of Mountain View to build it back. And the way we're going to build it back is by going through this process and treating each other respectfully and not pulling rabbits out of the hat. We need to share information and really behave very professionally. The city of Mountain View's residents and all the people who work here and visit here deserve nothing less.
I had a similar one, the moving from judgment to curiosity. Ultimately, we're all in service of our community, and so we should remain curious about the varying needs of our community.
Remember, I have a teaching background, so I just wait. Well, I think that we've come up with a wonderful ground rule list. I also think that it's one thing to list them, and that's symbolic, and that's a start. The other one is, as I heard you speak, most of you gave examples and kind of reaffirmed your commitment to it. And I think that's even more important because, we all have passed many resolutions and proclamations, and we know that our community challenges us to not just say them, but to live, breathe, work with each other and abide by them. So this was just very inspiring for me. So thank you for sharing. And the next part we're going to go to, and that's why I brought up inspiration, was I had this unique opportunity to meet and interface with you. I also did my diligence looking at LinkedIn and other things, but it was really a wonderful moment to hear from many of you about what inspired you to be in your public service, that very important role. And of course, if you're elected, many other people were also inspired enough to cast their vote to put you in that role. And what I was so impressed with is none of you were dialing it in. Every single person that I encountered or that Luke and I spoke with is all in. You have skin in the game. It was really evident. Whether or not you agreed with everybody on everything, we didn't go into that. What we wanted to talk about was what brought you here, and were you still staying inspired in order to do the challenging work that's coming up? And that's what we saw and experienced. So I just want to share some of the things that we saw. And I loved, and I'm a word person, so I loved it that people moved away from just their own agency to really talk about their journey, their path. And many of you even looked up as you were talking because you were re-inspired by what brought you. And I don't think the initial inspiration was, I'm inspired to go to a joint meeting on a Monday night for 3 hours. I don't think that was it. But the fact that you're here is pretty phenomenal. The fact that you are willing to do this and to give your time and to take another chance, take a leap of faith, and to continue doing the challenging work. And I know that a few of you brought up creativity and collaboration. And I always like to dissect that word. Collaboration is co-labor. It's working together, but it's labor. It is work. It is not easy. So we are going to labor together in order to make things happen. But let's go back to what inspired us. Serving our community, seeing problems and wanting to be part of the solution. I thought the second part of that was really profound because it wasn't just, it's easy to see a problem. It's harder to try to solve it. Educating and protecting and nourishing our youth. Making sure Mountain View is affordable and livable for our diverse community. And if you think about it, the diverse community is also something that we value. And working toward and contributing to the greater public good. Every single person, nobody was saying, I did this for myself or my own child or my own interest. It was always something beyond. Affordable housing and tenant protections, and we've heard that echoed, the importance of that from our community, helping disadvantaged families. Not everybody is experiencing their best quality of life. There are hardships. And helping them navigate. It can be a myriad of things. Lifelong activists, that was in our group. Environmental protections, these are the passions that brought people to their role. And then guiding that next generation towards success. Giving back, helping others, a fascination with government policy. Lucky you, that was not mine. But you know what? It's important. Some people can raise their hand and say, and equity. I heard equity over and over in different ways. Equity for young people, equity in opportunities, equity in advantages and housing. And this one was particularly powerful, so much that we just put the quote, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? And I would say that translates into tonight. If not us, then who is going to work on this? And if not now, then when? We can't put it off. We have to get the work done. Providing beautiful and joyful experiences for children, and then paying forward the opportunities that you had. And this is a highly educated group. Many of you have had many incredible opportunities, but the fact that you want to make sure that that continues for the next generation is really amazing. Next slide. And the next part, I'm going to ask you to also participate, but I want to preface it by sharing with you that in public service, we all know that we are often told most often when we get it wrong. I used to have a communication council and it turned into the complaint council. And sometimes it just wears on you that people want to point out when things are wrong. On the other hand, you can't get better if you don't know, but it would be nice sometimes to have some affirmation and know when we get it right. But that's not what people run to social media to tell us. It's not usually the headline that we want to put, that people want to read. People genuinely want to tell us when we need to do something better or different. And so we took this opportunity when we met with each of you to tell us what you value about the other agencies. This wasn't your time to brag about yourself. It was really to look at the other agencies, the other two agencies, excuse me, of the three of the triad, and say, what do they do? What do we appreciate about them? What is so wonderful? What are they contributing? And the reason why this was really wonderful is I bet that some of you would have no idea who said them, and you shouldn't. We're not attributing it to a person, but just the fact that someone took note hopefully can make you feel more appreciated and more validated, because when we're in a disconnect, sometimes you don't take that time to affirm. So I will just take volunteers if somebody would want to read from the slide. We're looking for a green light. Looks like just right here we have two.
Sure, I will say this. I think it's true. I've never met a city council member or trustee that I don't agree with on the fundamentals. And by that, I mean our common values.
And that was profound, because I know that you didn't say that in our meetings.
I did say that in our meeting.
Well, you said it in a way, but someone else also said, I guess is what I'm saying.
I didn't say those exact words.
Right.
You're right.
And so what I think is wonderful is someone from a different agency also felt that. And so that is right there what we're talking about. Different agencies, different perspectives, different roles, yet feeling that same value. So thank you so much.
And I also want to add that our city services and resources for our community members are incredible. We recently had an issue that was very quickly resolved by the city. So thank you, city staff.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I recognize the last one, which is Mountain View Westman School District does an amazing job of providing for all students regardless of background. And my kids went to Mountain View Westman schools quite a long time ago. They are now in their 30s. But one of the things that was part of the custom was making sure that every kid was included, and that that each child got the assistance that they needed. It wasn't always obvious what they needed, but but once it was figured out, people bent over backwards to take care of that, and that's a big deal. It's really a big deal. I very much treasure that.
I'm just going to pick one from the list. I think these are all terrific. Mountain View Wisman School District is very in touch with the community, and each trustee is very devoted.
We can go to the next slide because they keep coming.
I'll read another one. I applaud our city for keeping rental prices affordable and trying to solve the homelessness problem more than anybody else in our region. Also, environmental stewardship and consciousness. These are noble things to be focused on. I agree with that.
So this is kind of fun to read because I, for no reason related to this meeting, was just talking to my son earlier today about what he thought he got most. He went to Castro School, which is an MVWSD school, Graham Middle School, and then Mountain View High School. So I asked him what he got, what he thought he brought away from each one, and he had a lot to say. But you know, learning Spanish was because he went to Castro School, and then making lifelong friends that he still talks to every day in middle school. And then high school, he worked with the robotics team, which got him interested in engineering. I'm going to put, so, you know, he still remembers now. I'm going to pick one that's already been picked. MVWSD does an amazing job of providing for all students, regardless of background. I mean, when we went to Castro and Graham, that was really particularly evident. But because my kids went to Mountain View High School, I don't want to leave Mountain View High School out. So I was going to pick, yes, MVLA does an amazing job of getting our students prepared for life. They give them unique experiences like the robotics I talked about, and challenge them.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, here we go.
I'd like to acknowledge the one up here about MVLA provides top-notch high schools and people move here to go there. That indeed is true. And I think that's tied to one that was on the previous slide. On the previous slide, the MVLA treats its staff very well and provides a model on how teachers and staff should be paid. I think those are tied to each other and acknowledge the success of MVLA.
Thank you. We're going to move on. One of the other questions that we asked were examples of successful collaboration. And again, we talked about that co-labor. And people voluntarily came up with some of these, and you'll recognize some of them. But having affordable housing for elementary school teachers, that doesn't happen in every community. It happens very rarely, in fact. So leading the way. Safe routes to schools, having that partnership with schools and with the city, working together on those. Providing crossing guards, which is part of safety for not just youth, but the entire city. Leasing the land, when I saw the dollar part, that was added in later. That's pretty phenomenal to lease the land for $1. Student resource officers, that again is about safety and providing, and beyond the bell. So these are just some examples of successful collaboration that has worked. The next one, I needed a little more information about. My notes weren't as good. Sounds as if people came together to provide food to supplement the universal meal program. Was this during COVID solely, or was this beyond?
It is still ongoing.
Okay, that's what I thought was pretty phenomenal. That's what I had thought, but I wasn't sure. And so again, knowing that there are different demographic backgrounds and that young people and families have different stresses and hardships. This is amazing that many agencies came together. The Teen Center, feeding families, working on obtaining land, and then there has been a long history of school fields and parks collaboration, something to look at. Oops, I was going to do my side. And so the next part is we've kind of touched on where we've been and we touched on where we're going. But I also wanted to tell you how impressed I was with the backgrounds of all of you. We have attorneys, we have teachers, we have principal, we have people who've led planning commissions, people who worked in environmental issues, certainly computer science and technology. The lists of colleges, the doctorates, I mean, is phenomenal. And with all of that, my sense is you have the skill, and it's clear by your affirmations that we have the will. And so when you combine those things, skill and will, we will get through this. And so we're going to start to look at the future, but this is when we have to call upon you to help, because I'm the facilitator. I'm not magical. I don't have all the answers, but I can definitely help guide you in that direction and pull from you the things that will most resonate. But I needed to, and I think I even brought it. I have my own thing. Luke's going to help me out. So I did share with one or two of you, we have an elephant in the room. And this is just kind of silly, but it is representative. The elephant in the room is that things have not gone like we wanted, and that we have heavy duty, real negotiations. So I'm not making light of it. This was given to me after a successful facilitation with 2 agencies that were struggling. And later they said, thank you for bringing us to the realization that we do have some elephants in the room. And the elephant in our room is that we have had some challenges. And so we have to acknowledge them. And so what we did is, as we listened, we just recorded notes. And then I created a word cloud. And the word cloud on the left are some of those things that were not our proudest moments, but they're real. And they show that it is a genuine struggle. And so we've heard that even though we have these great other instances of collaboration, that has not translated into this particular environment. And so the words on the left came up. There's concern about imbalance and control. There's a strong fear of that some people have of making the wrong decision, making the wrong choice, not doing the right thing. And there has been a breakdown of communication. And I think many of us touched on that. But those things can be solved. We can get past them. And I think that's what was so fabulous, was just as many, in fact, more things came up as we talked about the future. So shifting from those things, almost every single one on the left has a stronger reaction on the right. And so if you think about deflection, you go into reflection. If you think about being isolated, you look at partnerships. If you think about transactional, you go to transformational. And each of those things has a possibility in itself, but only you, all of you electeds and people who are in positions of leadership, have the agency to make it happen. You have a lot of people in our community that are really counting on you to do this. And so we have to find this path forward. We can't stay mired in it. We need to get to that right side. But as we said, we're going to take the high road, but we can't dwell in history, but we also can't ignore the fact that there has been some trust that's broken. And I did a lot of studying on trust, and trust is broken up into components. And it's basically personal regard, integrity, competence. And those types of things go into it. And they're built by day-to-day interactions. And every time that someone tells you something and then does it, or tells you something and then doesn't do it, or blindsides, or does something like that, it's a little break in trust, or it's a little movement forward. So you think of it like a number line, and we're here and we don't know. I don't know. I'm new to you. You don't know if you can trust me. You don't know if what my intentions are. But as I have met with you, we're learning to build trust and relationship. I had a clean slate. And if I begin to betray that, then one breach will take me back to 0 or negative. It doesn't mean you can't get it back, but it's going to be more guarded and gradual. So the relationships we have in joint agencies are just like any relationship. They have to be cultivated and nurtured, and they cannot be taken for granted. And when you think about trust, what happens in people in leadership positions, some people think, trust me because I have the title. The title does not give you trust. What you do with a title in your empowerment is how you build trust. Some people think that trust comes with just knowing someone, but who has good intentions. But good intentions, if they're not followed through, and good intentions, if you don't have the competency to make it happen, then I can't put my confidence in you. I can't give you something because you're a good person that I like if I don't think you can make it happen. And so I'm really challenging the ad hoc committee, because not only does the public trust all the people as elected, thousands of people voted to put you in these positions or appointed, however that happened, people are counting on you. In the position of the ad hoc, that's an even greater responsibility. We really have hope and confidence that you will get to that next level, but it's going to be challenging. It's very complicated. There's a lot of people who are looking to see that you do it right. But if you're going to accept it, it's something you can live with. If you're going to be creative about it, if you're going to critically pause and reflect, then you can do it. And you want to think about, we're looking back to 1969. The people in the future will be looking back and saying, what did they do? Not with judgment, but hopefully with relief. They'll say, thank goodness they all came together and did something great for the Mountain View community. Where we don't have winners and losers, we have everyone gaining. So we're going to continue. This is the only sign I used to have in my office, was the only thing worse than being blind is having sight, but no vision. And so we really do have to keep looking forward. I believe some of our representatives said that earlier on. We have to look forward. We have to have a nod to the past, but we have to look forward. And that trust is coming through our speech, our conversation, our commitments, and our actions. Tonight, by all of you coming here, already that's a step in the right direction. By participating in our process, that was a step in the right direction. But I wanted to dissect that a little bit. Even the process that I set up, which I thought was pretty standard protocol for facilitation, which was having an individual intake to get feedback and then share and synthesize themes. What I noticed, and again, no judgment, but what I noticed is that not every agency was accepting of that. And my first inclination was, well, this is the process. It works. It works elsewhere. Why wouldn't it work here? But then I had to catch myself and say, well, there's a reason. Let's find out the reason why it might not work for each agency. And then we ended up having 3 different ways of doing it. I think Dr. Meyer had one way with her trustees, and Dr. Rudolph had another way. But the good thing was neither of them said, well, you have to do it my way, because our city council directors of Shoreline community wanted a different way. And actually that was beautiful. If we could take that as a mini example of where we're going and begin to understand there are some uneven power dynamics, and that people support what they help create, and input on the front end is an investment toward the end. But in order to do that, we have to relax some of the feelings of fear and concern. And we have to, when we do that, we will find if we can trust that process. If we let go and then people do not do their part, then we're going to be very hesitant to do that again. And when I say we, I'm saying we, whoever we are, in whatever position we're in. And so it's just something to think about when I had to learn that about our community here, that the concept of a joint agency had already built in some apprehension and some, I don't want to say suspicion, but maybe skepticism. And that was challenging for me because I've come from a different frame where everything needs to be joint. And I think one of you may have coined the phrase. I was trying to analyze that and say, why is it? And I think it's almost one of those things is when the communities I've worked with have not been as abundant. And I think someone used the word perils of prosperity words. And what happens is when you are truly standalone and resilient and you have many things going for you, you don't need to rely on others. You saw different kinds of things come up during COVID because suddenly people needed, during the pandemic, like we have to all band together. But when you actually have very independent, standalone, successful, outstanding agencies and organizations that are doing great things in their own right, you have to choose then to work with each other because there's not always a compelling need. So again, just something to think about. Not an answer to anything, but just ponder and think. Okay, we'll go forward. So one of the things that I've shared before, and I've done a lot of work with this, and I'm not saying it's the best frame, but it is one that works, is when you have, and again, we're not negotiating, but as you go toward negotiations or even challenging decision-making, there are different frames. And so many people are well versed in positional, which is people take positions. Take a position, that's kind of the old debate model. Here's my position, here's yours. And we figure out where it goes. I think some of our community members alluded to it. There's also interest-based, which is another step, and many, probably more common now. And interest-based is where you put forth your interests, but sometimes your interests could be different. And so then again, you're back in that position. So when you have traditional position-based, what happens is you have winners and losers, you have zero sum, some win and some lose. But when you get to core values, what you find is if you can do a core values-based decision-making, you find those common things and no one value has a higher priority than the others. And so they're not weighed in that way. You wouldn't, even if you value this, you would never do it at the expense of the other value because you also value that. So as you think about these, we have core values and that leads to a vision for what the future could be. This is just a subset. It's usually a whole workshop, but I wanted to share with you the types of core values and visioning that our group has already done, but you did it in isolation. It's so much more powerful when you do it with others. But if clearly we still value a functional working relationship, clearly we all understand that we're better and stronger together. We value our community, equity, and belonging. And this one was really special to me coming from outside is you are an exemplar in the region and you value that. And then you go and look to the other side and you see the vision. What does that mean? If we value the functional working relationship, we will strengthen our partnerships. We will put our efforts into those things. And that's a way of shifting to the values. So if you value equity and belonging and you value cooperation, you won't choose to make decisions that hurt those things. Okay. Is there anything that stood out to you? Is there anything that spoke to you? Anything that you have questions or comments on? There's one more slide also, but you have it at your desk. We can take that.
I would say equity and belonging. For those of you who don't know, I have dystonia and I work every day with a service dog. So that belonging not only pertains to the humans, but also our planet. I consider us one of the animals that lives on our planet. And I know that because every day, actually every moment, I communicate with another animal who is now lying at my feet. To me, that is belonging is something that actually dogs need. They need to be part of a pack. Humans may not necessarily say, I need to be part of a pack, but in fact, if they're not part of a community, then their mental health suffers. And COVID-19 has sure shown us that isolation and virtual schooling and virtual work does not serve our need for human connection. And I just read an article on learning loss from COVID-19. And it's also a direct result of our proximity to animals in the environment. So I see everything connected.
The first bullet point on a functional working relationship. When I saw that, I actually kept going back to the previous slide, slide 19, about that talked about our challenges, and you brought up the elephant in the room, and I thought to myself that there's so much packed into that word cloud about our challenges that felt like saying that there's an elephant in the room didn't fully acknowledge all that's in there, and that there needs to be further places for people's feelings to be and the hurt to be acknowledged and aired. And I recognize it's not in today's agenda to do that, but I feel like unpacking that left side there is necessary for there to be a functional relationship. At some level, saying there's an elephant but not saying what the elephant is doesn't get us to a place where I think the ad hoc or us will be at that functional place in the aspirational right side.
Thank you for pointing that out. And when we get to hurdles, you'll see hopefully a little connection with that, but it is definitely because I think everyone may have a different idea of what that is. Thank you.
So I'm looking at the visions. And I'm not going to read a particular one out because I really think they're best taken as a whole. And they do, maybe they don't sum up everything that the two districts and the city want to do, but they really sum up a lot of it. And I think those kind of are our goals to reach those visions, you know, all 7 of them and maybe a few more.
I have to chime in with what Allison said, that when I was looking at the visions, I was thinking of it as a wheel. And all these are the spokes that holds the wheel together to make the world go round, or the wheel go round. And that's, in our case, the world or Mountain View go round. And we have to give some understanding and value and money to all the parts of the wheel.
So I'm looking under the vision where there's the bullet point about ensuring our community is served by all agencies of Mountain View. I might offer a little bit of an edit that, you know, we all are serving our community, but serving our community in an exemplary manner, being able to serve our community to the best of our abilities, having the resources needed to serve our community well, having effective partnerships. I think there's a qualitative piece that needs to be added to that statement to really reflect what I think the meaning behind it was.
Thank you.
Yeah, one of the core values I would like to see as part of this negotiation is working with the best information we have available. We don't have an infinite amount of time to study things. So we want to work with the best information that we have available and come to a consensus that it will work for the need that we have at the moment. And then maybe in the future, we'll need to develop more information that's better, you know, on a specific subject.
Thank you. So we're going to move forward, but if something else comes to you. So when we go back to the word cloud that Trustee Changwit had mentioned, we also are recognizing there have been hurdles. And so some of this you might have heard already in different ways, but these were the ones that actually people identified. And again, this isn't coming from me. This is coming from people that we spoke with. So there is some history, but it also can become some historical baggage that weighs people down. There's been some entrenched patterns that people are having trouble breaking from. the lack of trust we've heard. The collateral damage that comes a little bit with the blindsides and the surprises, but it plays out in the public. And there has been, as you so eloquently acknowledged, some hurt feelings and emotions, and they can't be just ignored. Lack of understanding. I loved it that people were saying in your core values that you seek to understand. And there's been some frustration about the timing, the cadence, and the lack of certainty. So those are things that I heard. We'll go to the next slide. There's some more. Let's hear from some of you on some of these. Is there any that don't make sense? Is there anything that maybe doesn't belong there?
I think the breakdown of communication over matters of mutual interest is huge. And I think it's really, really important that we continue to communicate and not just like hear something and, you know, make assumptions. I think we need to continue talking.
And can you tell me what that looks like for you? I just want to press on that. I've heard a lot about communication. Is it formal? Is it informal?
I would say all of the above. I mean, truly, we're developing relationships, we're individuals, but you know, we also need to have the formal communication, and we need the structure of like the what are we calling the joint, the meeting, the ad hoc committee meetings, and then you know our school board and our council meetings as well. But I think we need to pick up the phone sometimes. Hey, this is going to be on our agenda or whatever. I just think we need to keep talking because I think silos of communication and I think all agencies are, you know, have engaged in that. I'm not pointing my finger at any one agency, but I think it's really, really important that we continue dialoguing.
Yeah, I would follow up on that by saying that really it's not only just communicating over matters of mutual interest, but working together on understanding how the decisions that affect one agency impact the other agency and vice versa. And in those situations like we're doing now, you know, get together to work through those issues ahead of time before it happens, not afterwards.
So I'm wanting to make sure we capture that. What I heard strongly was the interdependence, that things do have sometimes intended and sometimes unintended consequences, but you're so intertwined. The decisions that might seem to be solely in one agency's purview can affect others. And
yeah, and I didn't mean to say unintended consequences. I think the consequences, well, say not, they were expected consequences. Okay, if one thought through them ahead of time, it's not completely unknown.
so it sounds like the audience didn't quite hear that last part. Would you mind repeating it, Trustee Lambert?
Oh, I think what was I going to say? The consequences of our mutual decisions, if one thought about it and thought them through, they're completely known ahead of time, and they're not unexpected at all. And I think that's what makes it even more frustrating.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I would just agree with that one. I think that it's something that the city is experiencing as well. You know, decisions that are made that we don't feel we've heard ahead of time, and that there are consequences. I don't know whether, I don't want to argue with them whether they're known or unknown. I have a feeling that both agencies don't know ahead of time fully what the consequences are. But maybe you're right. Maybe we all fully know. I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not gonna argue. But I think we're all experiencing it.
And that acknowledgement, the co-acknowledgement is already a huge step in the right direction. So thank you for both for sharing that. And then the last one, I thought, I know that we have staff here. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed one. I apologize.
Yeah, so I think for MVLA, I would say the external constraints are really a big factor in our negotiations. I think the city and MVLA have really cooperated in terms of land, as you saw historically, but now land is at a premium, and so that is, and the city has presented options, but they're all externally constrained, let's put it that way. So I think that is the biggest hurdle, I think. But I think it's something that the city has expertise in working with many different agencies. They've certainly done it before. And so I am hopefully optimistic that the city can perform the same historical cooperation that we have had in the past, despite, I guess, the constraints that are now existing.
I feel like I can see your minds thinking, but people are a little bit maybe forming your thoughts, so we can, this is the most probably powerful piece, because the first step to moving forward is to kind of acknowledge what it is, what are these root causes, what are the things that are keeping us from being there already.
Maybe this is a dangerous question to ask, but I feel like I want to connect this to one of the norms that nobody brought up: speak with candor and honesty. And I feel like at the appropriate time, it might be helpful to speak with precision, or to provide specific examples where there has been a breakdown in communication, or we feel like we're being targeted or attacked. I'm not feeling like this is the appropriate time to do that. I came prepared with examples, though. So whenever you allow me to, I'm happy to share with great precision where I feel there are impediments to our ability to negotiate effectively.
And I imagine the school districts would have similar lists. What goes around comes around, right?
Oh, in response to Councilmember, I would hope that this is the setting that sometime we do have those honest conversations here, because once we move into ad hoc, those aren't necessarily public meetings in the way this is. People attend because they're worried about this. We're here because we worry about this. And I don't know if we really are speaking candidly about what our worries are. I feel like there's so much to unpack here, but I don't know. I just don't want us to be bogged down by formalities, and it's 8 o'clock. And then we put everything into this, what is ultimately a siloed process once we go to non-Brown Act ad hoc meetings. So I hope that people, if not now, I do want to hear the list, because I want to recognize the challenges that the city's feeling. And it's not a tit for tat. I think it's more about acknowledging that there's been hurt. And it's not about performing for the public either. It's about us in this room bearing witness to there's been challenges. And I hope that in our remainder of our time together, I hope these things get aired, because I think that's a necessary part for us to have a functional relationship.
And I would echo that. First of all, you could be my co-facilitator now. Sorry, Luke, because that was my point too. I think this is the time, if not now, then when. We did say that we would follow the norms. So we would do it in a respectful manner. We wouldn't be blaming, shaming, judging, but we can say, for instance, in this setting, we didn't have a mechanism, or we were disagreeing about data, or we felt blindsided or something. So we can give some examples, because if it's concrete, then we know that we can work on it. So if you're comfortable, I'm encouraging it.
Okay. I have a couple of categories of concerns. The first is, it bothers me greatly when the city of Mountain View is accused of breaking the law. It makes it hard for me to negotiate in good faith when I'm being accused, or the agency I represent is being accused of doing things that the state does not allow. We talked a little bit about the Civic Center Act and the JUA discussion on Tuesday, so I won't rehash that. But more pertinent to this discussion is the use of the term redevelopment agency to describe the shoreline community. If in fact you believe that it really is a redevelopment agency, you are accusing us of breaking the law. And that is a very severe accusation, right? The state does not allow redevelopment agencies. They were dissolved over a decade ago. So if there is a continued use of that term to describe the shoreline community, it makes it hard for me to feel like we're working in good faith. It feels like a statement that is intended to be inflammatory, right? It feels like a great way to discredit the city or to create alarm and confusion and consternation. So I couldn't work with someone who insists on calling the shoreline community a redevelopment agency, because it is not, and it legally cannot be. I brought some, my toner was running out, so I couldn't print copies for everybody. But there is a flyer, I'll send it 3 that way and 2 this way, that is posted on the Mountain View Wisdom School District website that I feel like is designed to, again, create alarm and consternation and confusion. And it includes statements like the city of Mountain View keeps the surplus it receives in the shoreline community. And this is a great way to try and foment concern and animosity within the community. It is very difficult to negotiate with an agency that insists on antagonizing its supposed partner. I feel like a great way to demonstrate good faith is to take down this flyer and the website that includes a lot of information that I have to be careful because I don't want to, well, I forgot what the term is here. I have to interpret charitably, right? Perhaps there's a serious misunderstanding of the shoreline community and how it works. And if that's the case, then let's work with the city and put information on that website, if you need to have it, that more accurately describes the work and the functioning of the shoreline community. But this flyer isn't that. This flyer is a great way to get the community to oppose the work of the city. And it's hard for me to work in good faith with an agency that places a flyer like this in the public realm. And then the last category is in fact the use of data. I know we have to leave historical baggage at the door. So I am violating that norm in saying this. But I sent an email in November 2021. Some trustees may remember this, that included, I don't know, it was probably, there was a map that showed housing production figures in the city of Mountain View, but it used gross figures instead of net figures. And that was not only concerning, but actually painful for me in particular, because that's a great way to erase people who have been displaced from our community. When you see, for instance, at 1555 West Middlefield, the number 115, that is alarming to our community. That's a lot of housing, but it erases the fact that 116 apartments that included a number of students who go to the schools that you represent used to live there, right? It's a great way to, again, create alarm and consternation and fear. And I sent an email saying, hey, FYI, here are some examples where the numbers I think could be a little bit more accurate. 2 years later, March 2023, In a public presentation to the trustees, the same map was used with the same numbers. It's very difficult for me to negotiate in good faith with an agency that insists on using numbers that they know are inaccurate, because I sent a letter and a very similar letter was sent by the city of Mountain View 2 years later. So I guess what I would be interested in knowing is, do you actually want to work in good faith? Right? Or would you be willing to take this flyer down that presents information to the community that is not accurate, right? Or, to insist on using housing production figures that I feel are designed to construct an alarmist narrative. And if you want to do that, that is fine. That is a perfectly valid strategy, but it's one that is antithetical to our ability to negotiate in good faith.
So I know that was challenging and hard for you, but at the same time, it was valuable. I did see that you were really conscious of the norms and used iMessages. And I will say, when we get to some of the suggested considerations, there are solutions that can come forward to things like joint messaging, agreeing on what goes on a website. And if it's coming with both logos, it takes more, or all three logos, it takes more effort, but there are solutions for that. But thank you. Other examples of some of these breakdowns so that we know what we're dealing with.
Just to respond to Councilmember Ramirez's comments, I think not everything, I agree with some of what you say, but I think accuracy to some degree is in the eyes of the beholder. What you feel is inaccurate, we feel is accurate. And so going back to communication, I think talking about the perceptions and kind of parsing it so that we can come to a shared understanding and perspective is super, super helpful. And I'm hopeful that we can get there to a place where we can do that. But, I do appreciate your concerns.
Is there a practice? I have a question, and then we don't want to forget you. So is there a practice for joint study sessions? Okay, that's just helpful for me. Go ahead.
A slightly different kind of tangent. And when we have the hurdles is lack of understanding of each other's motives and needs, but also lack of understanding of the actual wants. I think, plus the fact that we as elected officials, we make policy decisions and we direct staff to do things. And it turns out a lot of these decisions that are, when these breakdowns have happened, could be on the staff level. And I struggle connecting what vote correlated to this decision. I think I think we all trust our staff relatively. And obviously we don't go in and do all the things ourselves. But I think as we are negotiating with each other, having that record of like, the staff is doing this because of this direction from the elected official body, I think is something I think that could help us moving forward. Because it's very strange. The flyer that was sent out, I can't imagine like the board of the school board being like, we are going to decide on this is how we're going to put out our flyers kind of thing. I think there is probably some wiggle room, but to make the board make a decision on, okay, going forward, this is not the kind of data we're going to put out. This is not the kind of narrative we're going to put out. Or even affirming is like, if that is the narrative you want to put out, I want to see a vote on it. I want to see the public input on that. I think that would go far.
Thank you. Perhaps taking a step back, just something that I have been thinking about, and I had to be on an airplane last week, so I missed the council discussion on this, but I think going back to the norms and ground rules, I am seeing one that's missing, and it kind of goes back to the one that I had prioritize, which is provide clear agenda items, goals, and objectives. And I think understanding how each body communicates with each other would be extremely helpful. Last week, we had members coming forward saying that they were speaking in their personal capacity as residents. And I think it was, for me, very confusing to understand whose position there is getting represented. And sometimes we get letters, and this is for both entities. Sometimes we get letters from the superintendent, sometimes we get letters from the board president. And so maybe setting up a norm on how we communicate so that we understand how the information is being sent to council would be helpful. So for example, was this decided in a vote? Was it a part of an agenda item? I think that, was it part of the ongoing staff negotiations with which the electeds do not take part in? I think trying to understand a little bit more about how these communications are being sent would help to understand, is it the entire body which feels this way in terms of a letter being presented, or is it just administration? I find that that has been a norm that we haven't had historically leading up to this point. And as we move forward with norms and ground rules, that would be something that I would request, and perhaps something that would help as we move into the ad hoc committee, and that information is being hopefully disseminated back to all of us so that it is, again, very clear how these items are coming forward, and that we stay true to the goals and objectives that we're here tonight to discuss. So that would be my suggestion. If we're open to that, I don't know how to proceed with that, Dr. Bowers, but I do see that's something perhaps missing. Thank you.
As you were saying, I saw heads nodding, and everything that you bring, we would be bringing forward. So thank you.
May I comment on that as well? I concur with what Councilmember Kamei just suggested, but I would also like to add a timeline piece in there, because, you know, government is slow. I think we all wish we could move forward more quickly on certain agenda items, but we need to make sure, if we're trying to give the governing agency a chance to respond as an agency, that there's time to schedule to agendize a meeting in order to have that opportunity. So I think I'd add maybe timing or cadence to that suggestion. Thank you.
And if I might clarify, I know a couple of our trustees spoke last week, but our board had not had a public discussion about the JUA. So that, I believe, is why they felt constrained to say as an individual, as opposed to formally representing the school board, because the school board has not discussed it. I think, you know, feeding into this challenge around communication, when there is an issue that somebody notices, how that is questioned, why is the body doing that? Asking each agency, why has this action taken place? And then listening to that why. It is very challenging when things are presented as ultimatums. And so, you know, in the grand scheme of things, the city is a much more powerful organization than either of the school districts. It has a significantly higher budget. It has more citizens who vote for it, at least than the elementary school district. So there's more residents being represented. It also has a much larger administrative staff. We don't have legal counsel in-house, for example. Our legal counsel is contracted out because we're not big enough to have legal counsel in-house. So those are some things that mean, I think sometimes things come across as not being as sleek as what the city might do, but it is in fact being a smaller agency with less resources. I am worried though about kind of issuing ultimatums, take this down or you're not acting in good faith, because what we saw last week is that if something is perceived as being a certain way, then an ultimatum is given and no chance for negotiation. And so if we're going to enter this openly, it's about expressing where the questions are, where the concerns are, having a frank discussion about it. But I don't know that ultimatums are actually very productive.
And that might be something we look at for ground rules and norms, that we're going to try to not give ultimatums. That might be under consideration. Did you have something?
I just appreciate when they said that the city council would prefer there not to be kind of messages from the school district that seem to disparage the city. And I think we all share that value, that we don't want agencies sending, unilateral statements to the community that maybe, that don't have all the perspectives. I think part of that is just, we shouldn't be meeting more often, right? This is unprecedented that we're all here. And, so some of you were watching, there was the city had a meeting last week about about an issue between the school district and the city. That was, that meeting, that unilateral meeting of them agendizing that. There were more hours on that meeting than what's scheduled for this one, right? Scheduled for this 2.5 hours together, right? So and we in the school district do the same. We spend hours longer than this meeting talking about the city, right? So it's like, if we're spending hours talking about you and you're spending hours talking about us, why aren't we spending more hours talking together? And I think that part of that I think is helpful. And I apologize to MBLA, because I sometimes feel like MBLA is like the middle child, just like, what is going on here? It's like, we don't have a lawyer at the table. Like, I apologize to MBLA about this, but I just feel like I hope this isn't our only meeting of this sort, because while this norm setting is really important, but it's also important that we just are talking with each other at the same table, because then there isn't a question. There was so much at the last meeting where they're like, what is the school board thinking? And we couldn't speak because it wasn't our agendized meeting, right? And that's why our trustees were trying to be very precise in saying that. So I would actually really agree with what Councilmember Ramirez is saying about let's all of us not send single statements, because that conveys this idea that we're self-sufficient agencies. This idea, the second to last bullet point, independent self-sufficient agencies. And I feel like that's been our rhetoric recently. And maybe that's some of our actions. That's kind of like putting this roadmap that we are moving that direction, when historically Mountain View, none of our 3 agencies have been self-sufficient, and we're certainly not independent. We all depend on each other. And there's a few decisions we're about to make, some of our agencies, that will set the direction of, are we setting a new course and trying to be independent and self-sufficient, which I think we'd fail at. So I hope this isn't our last meeting of this sort, because I recognize there's only about an hour left of this meeting. And so to address what Councilmember Ramirez is saying about let's not attack each other and send unilateral messages, I hope we meet again, whether it be as 2 agencies or 3.
I just want to, I agree with much of what you said, but maybe not all of it. But I just want to remind you that, everybody, that that both agencies are often in that situation. Like the number is probably 2 times come to MVWSD board meetings because we caught something on the agenda very last minute. We weren't told about it ahead of time. The particular one I'm thinking about is a presentation where it was said that, and I'm not going to be able to paraphrase it completely, but that the only solution that we're going down a road where MVWSD may have to put portables all over the Mauna Loma campus, which I personally think is unlikely, but nobody, and there were several other statements in that presentation, like that the city was indicating a site in the North Bayshore area for a school that had, now I'm not remembering exactly, but a sewage treatment center right next to it, which was out of date information. And we weren't, none of that was run by us ahead of time. And I was there, and I've been, and some of our staff was there as well, speaking, and in very much the same situation as you were, so none of us are giving. I mean, I would have liked to have had input on that presentation. It reflected, frankly, it had a lot of information in it that was one, I think highly inaccurate, and two, very really put the city down in a way that was inaccurate. And I would have liked to have had that presentation run by us ahead of time so that we could correct some of the facts in it that were, you know, I know our Dawn Cameron, our public works director, got on to correct some of the facts. They were just out of date. And if we hadn't noticed those on the agenda and come there at the last minute, they would not have been corrected. And you would have put, and there were a number of, for example, parents, school parents, I think there were 40, but I could be wrong, attending that meeting virtually, who would have heard all this inaccurate information if we hadn't noticed at the last minute. So, you know, I think there's a lot of that going on. I feel like we're often portrayed badly, and we're not warned about it ahead of time, and we have to come. I've been phoned at the last minute to attend those meetings. And so I think that there could be improvement in that area.
Well, I want to go back to constraints, external constraints, but constraints and also assumptions, and then the data. And when you make a decision at any of the agencies, in theory, we know the assumptions on which we're making it. We know the constraints that either external or internal that are we're doing them with. And then we have the data that we need to consider as we make the decision. And I think that's kind of what's missing in some cases. We don't see all the other agencies' constraints and assumptions they're making, as well as their data they're working with when they make their decisions. For instance, when we make a decision on Mike's budgets, he's our CFO, we have all that together and we make a decision. But we don't have that access to whatever kind of decisions that may conflict with what we want to do from other agencies necessarily. And in advance, so that we can think about it and give our input to them.
Oh, Dita, did you want to?
I just wanted to say, unless Phil, you wanted to say it because you're the board president, how we function, how we're functioning, since the public may or may not know. Okay, so basically, we at MBLA decided, and it was a vote. They decided that I'm very honored as a trustee elected in November, but I was on Parks and Rec Commission for 8 years, and Phil, our board president, are representatives in this committee, or whatever we're calling it. We have not had any public meetings about it. Therefore, I have not said anything in public about it because I'm constrained by the Brown Act. I've not said anything to other trustees. I did meet, because I think it's my duty to meet, I did meet with the 3 subcommittee members, and we discussed our mutual interests and our kind of mutual hurdles, misunderstandings, and I thought they were very productive discussions. That is the extent to which we have, you know, we have engaged with City Council to this point. Personally, I would like to proceed because I think we have a lot to discuss. And a lot of what I have to discuss is I'm constrained because, you know, they have to do with land negotiations, and land negotiations, for those of you who don't know, are never discussed in public because they involve multiple entities who have multiple interests. And if I were to bring up their names, then it would immediately make discussions much more difficult because that's just the way land negotiations go. And that's true for any land negotiation, whether it be for affordable housing, a park, a school. anybody on city council can tell you this. This is not new information. So that is why I am not saying anything that significant apart from what I just told you. And that is the sum total of MVLA's involvement so far. And we would definitely like to proceed forward with good faith. And we have worked with the city. And in fact, as you saw, we have had great success with the city. It's just gotten considerably more difficult now. And that's not due to the city. It's due to the fact that the land is now that much more expensive. And now it's not just one agency. Now it's not just the city. It's like 4 or 5 different agencies. And we are hoping, as I mentioned, that the city is already helping us with this, and I appreciate that. So I want to acknowledge that. And I also want to say that that depends on trust. And I think so far, at least I hope, Lucas, since you were saying lack of trust, that we have conducted ourselves in a way that promotes that trust, because we literally cannot do land negotiations. It's impossible for us. We're a district. We know nothing about land acquisition. You guys do this like, every other meeting is a meeting about some development. This is, for us, like, the last time we acquired a school, probably Phil has the information, but it was a long time ago. So, we just don't have that knowledge. And yes, I did say that to be funny, because you got to have some levity in this meeting. So yes, we would really appreciate that. And that's also been public knowledge. The city has actually put some ideas forward in their public meeting. So I'm not sharing anything that's not already being shared by the city, but as to how and what they're doing exactly, I have to go, please, city, help us, because there's just no way we can get a 3rd high school without your help. And for us, our enrollment has been flat despite COVID. As you guys know, you spent a lot of money helping us expand our schools. And that lack of expansion before caused mental health challenges for our kids. Overcrowding literally caused our kids to get lost. We don't want that to happen again. This is not just sticking 5 kids in a classroom. It is that kids literally, the campus is not built for that size of kids. And the weight room was being used as a classroom, which is an equity issue.
So,
and
Trustee Gordon, I think we might be getting a little bit
yeah,
off from the topic, but they're wonderful examples. I would want you to hold on to those, and but we would want to get a little bit back to, those were great examples of some of the issues that we've talked about. Is that okay?
yeah, that's fine. I know I talked for a long time.
No, it was very, very well put. Thank you. And I think we had Trustee Conley and then.
Is that
Oh, and
I
okay.
had been about to speak and then noticed Theta was ready to speak and didn't want to cut her off. I'm curious, some of what we're doing today is kind of setting up a framework for moving forward, right? And what I'm hearing is a real need for, what does it mean when trustees come to speak at a council meeting? What does it mean when things appear on agendas or in packets that one agency thinks are incorrect? And how do we address that? And I don't have an answer for that. I know we've experienced it too. Like there was a DEIR that was put forward to the Environmental Planning Commission that talked about schools, but the school district got really upset because it was inaccurate in our view. And that was back in January. So it's not, I don't think it's single-sided. And I know, for example, this is a mea culpa. When we talked at our first meeting this fall, where we talked about the Mauna Loma perimeter controls, the fencing project, for example, Our mayor and our assistant city manager were both present and commented during public comment on the options that were presented. And in my mind, I went, oh, that's fantastic. I'm so glad they were here. It means we got city input. But I don't think we then sent anything to the city separately asking for input. But if we had some kind of ground rules that we established in our agency about how we want to communicate around those things, that might help those misunderstandings.
It's almost as if you saw our next slides, but thank you. I think we had a couple more comments on this, and then we will get to some of those very ideas. Thank you so much.
I just wanted to mention nomenclature. You know, in English, a single word can mean a lot of different things. And I think it's in this case, one of the things that is used very differently by the city and the school district is the term housing. In the city lexicon, when we talk about housing, we need places where people sleep, they eat, they live. Apartments, houses, that sort of thing. When the school district says house, they mean a school where kids go during the school day. And I'm not sure how many other words like that there are, but I think we need to be really, really careful about our nomenclature.
Thank you. You're up.
Okay. One of the things I mentioned before, like how important it is to have a vote that solidifies the direction. I think one of the things that we learned early on council, actually it kind of rotates as we get new council members every once in a while through, but when we have a study session and then each council member says what they need or want, and then at the end of it, they turn to staff like, do you have what you need? And staff is like, yes. Do we know what staff actually got through? And that's why toward that more recently, we were more like, okay, is there agreement on this? Straw poll. I think that could be helpful with all our bodies to have stuff like that in relation to the decisions that are being made so that our staff and your staff have clarity on the direction moving forward. I think that would probably be helpful.
So I really appreciate, oh, you had another one.
Well, I was going to say we should move on, but I just want to say one thing. I think we really have been caught up in sort of coming up with the same numbers for things, right? Housing projection, families, students, and oftentimes our presentations are based on the numbers that we've received from our consultants, right? Which then seem untrue to someone else who's looking at those numbers. So I've heard, we're never going to agree on the numbers. I've heard, we need to come up, decide what those numbers are going to be. So one of my hopes for the ad hoc is we can sort of put a conclusion to that so that when we do our projections, one side doesn't feel like the numbers are false.
And so I will tell you that there are examples, and again, these are just, we're going to move toward some other solutions, but some things that are happening that some people have mentioned that don't always happen in other communities, just things to think about. It is not a frequent, I guess it's atypical that agencies go and use the podium for public comment. Usually there's another forum, a different way for sharing information or correcting information. And so that's just something to think about. Not to say they can't, but that there's generally, usually that's, to me, it's not necessarily the problem, it's a symptom of the larger problem, right? And as well as public records requests, those are typically not between an interagencies in one community. It's, again, doesn't mean it can't happen. People have a right to do it. They generally come from public, and usually interagency shares more freely. And so these are just some things, again, for us to think about as we work toward solutions and just other models and other ways of interacting and doing business, because we want to be mindful of constraints. But there's a lot of opportunity for growth here because we can co-construct, we can share information in advance. We can even, I've seen it hundreds of times when agencies are brought to be part of the presentation. the other agencies that have the expertise or the manpower or female power, whatever, the people power, when they actually come and co-present. And so those are things I haven't seen. Of course, I'm new to Mountain View, not to say they haven't happened, but those are just some things that we might want to consider.
So just to follow up on your comment, I think that another thing about data that would be useful, because we've been talking for years, I think also not just looking at sort of competing projections, but actuals as they pan out, and comparing them to the projections to kind of as a guidepost for, for what sorts of projections we should look at.
As far as MVLA enrollment goes, Mike Matheson presents both our projections and our actuals. Mostly we meet our actuals. I mean, it might be off by, say, 20 students. At least the time I've been here, and he also presents historical data, and you're welcome to ask him for that data. It's freely available because he presents it at public meetings.
I was looking for your green. I didn't have my green on. Okay, so now we're going to move on. So I think this is just another way a lot of people, a picture's worth 1,000 words. As I met with people, I asked you to come up with metaphors for where we are. And then again, we're going to take that leap going forward. We see tug of wars. We see people rowing in different directions. We see people working in silos. We see sometimes it's a one-way street, maybe one way where things are being transactional. We see a house divided. We see a little child with the plate divided into 3 pieces so that the peas never touch the mashed potatoes and the corn, and all that. We see the sapling that is being braced, and that's a symbol of the relationship. It's a small sapling that is being braced up by the 3 stakes, and those would be the agencies that would hopefully help it grow into something. We see, and some of you referenced it, we kind of see some of this is like a parental disagreement. There's kind of the eye of the storm. We're in the mix of it. And I will say that we have to acknowledge that staff is feeling that. And many of you did, that as much as you feel the responsibility to do things, staff is also carrying this. And it's a lot of time and a lot of energy. And sometimes it feels as if it could be a drain or taken away from other focus areas that are really critical to each individual agency. So, but I do think that, as Trustee Chang said, it is important that we invest in this process for these hours. And then the one on the top right is, this one really kind of struck me, and maybe it's because of family dynamics, but it's someone in the family has passed away and they're quibbling about a will and forget their family. And so it just kind of struck me. We'll go to the next slide, because then, as always, we go toward the future. So we see the strong sapling, the strong tree now that's grown. We see people rowing in the right direction. We see that there is a 2-way communication and 2-way give and take. But we also see that merging, the merge sign of people coming together to go together. That little plate becomes a beautiful charcuterie board, which someone brought that up. And then instead of a tug of war, you see a rope bracing and holding up people, helping them go to heights they had never anticipated. And then the choir, I don't remember who came up with that one, you probably could self-identify, but it was about not losing your identity. You still have your distinct role, you have your part, but when you put it together, it's a harmony. And that's the community that Mountain View wants. That's our community here that we can be, and we are in so many instances. We're just not quite there with this project. So we'll move to these ideas. And these are some, and tonight, I think you've even come up with more. So I'm fully present in the facilitating. Luke is taking a lot of notes, but also I would say this is the beginning of this conversation too. So if something else comes to you, it's not too late to share. That's where the parking lot ends. If you're in the parking lot thinking I should have, could have, it's not too late. But these are some concepts that have been shared. We could explore in more detail a core values-based framework, which moves you toward those values where we saw so much commonality and common ground. We can move past the blame, shame, and who's right or wrong or who did this. Doesn't mean you don't say there were wrongs that have been done, things that we have to correct, but we're going to focus on how we get there. And we just touched on this. I think some of you said the expertise of fellow agencies. Mountain View, Los Altos just said, that's not their primary focus, isn't understanding all of the development and all those things. There's another agency that does that. Could we bring them in to have them share that expertise? And likewise, if schools have certain expertise on mental health or youth or needs, then that would be shared. And I think one of the biggest things that we found with this particular situation is we kind of let things get too far. People expressed some frustration, and it wasn't anyone's intention. I don't think anyone said, let's just make this drag on. But I do think that what has happened is we have to have a swifter correction. Probably one of the biggest learning lessons I learned as a leader was I would sometimes be, oh, well, maybe it'll work out, or maybe it'll come in, but actually we need to course correct if we get off track. Let's just pivot and make it happen in a different way with good solutions that all of you have come up with. And then what really struck me as we were listening is that there's so many more things we agree on. So maybe we can put those in and kind of celebrate that and then say that there's only these few areas we don't. So that it helps you chunk it out, helps you compartmentalize, it helps you realize there is success. It's not as if everything is in turmoil. There's some areas that the ad hoc, so that otherwise the ad hoc committee will feel that they have this enormous unbearable task, but many things will be already queued up. And then we want to identify those decision points. I think some of you captured it better than we did even, about the input prior to those key decisions, because they are going to affect other agencies. And how do we allow for that input? Everything's moving fast, so it can't happen in every instance, but particularly major decisions there has to be some kind of opportunity for that. And the word choice, you said nomenclature. I mean, we need to think about that. And our messaging, whether it's our websites or our flyers or our communication to our primary constituents, we all know we can rally up troops, right? We can do that if that's our intention. But is that the best use? Or could we have other ways of interacting? The unilateral public statements, someone else used, I think it was ultimatums and things, a joint statement is so hard. In fact, the first time I've worked with agencies on joint statements that have not been accustomed to it, we end up saying almost nothing because we can't agree on anything. But then you get into the routine with it. And it makes the reporters' jobs easier because we've given them, they don't have to decipher, they don't have to pick this and that, or say there's this and this, and somewhere in the truth is in between. This is what we stand, and we post that together jointly. And one of our elected officials, I almost gave it away, one of our elected officials said it better than I would again, but others said something similar, was as we go through this process, there's some opportunities for joint advocacy as well. And how is our energy best expended with, some of the disagreements with each other, or really uniting against things that can make a transformational difference. Any comments on some of those things? And I'm sure there's some things missing.
So I'm a negative person and I like to say negative things. One thing that we haven't really talked a lot about, that is one of the elephants in the room and will be challenging to address, is I actually think there's a lot more harmony on the elected official side than there is on the staff side. I have, I think, good relationships with all of the elected officials here. I like everyone. No,
I see the head shaking.
I have a terrible relationship. I'm sorry. That's fine.
But you're sitting next to me.
I get the impression, at least, that when I speak with individuals on other agencies, the bodies of other agencies, that they're productive, and I think we're actually generally aligned on values, as one of the earlier slides had indicated. I have less confidence that when we say to our respective staffs, okay, great, let's work together, that there will be less success. And I don't know how to fix that. And it's unfortunate that we didn't have sort of a staff equivalent to this. I actually, so I'm curious, you have a different reaction to my initial thought. Maybe we don't like each other, and that's okay. Or maybe I've completely misunderstood. But so maybe I'm speaking too soon. But I guess the broader point is, I think on the elected side, I have great optimism that we could work together with facilitation and collaboration. I remain skeptical that when we start to transition the bulk of the work to staff, that there will be the same ability to address the gap. And I'd be curious to hear, in your experience working with other agencies, what can we do as elected officials to help our staffs succeed?
So generally I'll answer in the short term, but I know we have others comment, but generally it starts with modeling and then it ends with accountability and expectation. I've never been an elected official. I've always been staff. You rise to the expectation if it's clear and reasonable. And also there needs to be support for it. Sometimes it's education, sometimes it's coaching, sometimes it's giving people a path forward. And I think it won't happen as publicly, but there's ways to rebuild if the trust is broken. But it starts small. And but basically what we find is if we stick to being professional, reducing emotion around it, being honest and ethical, then we can move forward.
I mean, the way to be held accountable is I've been harping on this a lot. We need a vote. Like, if not for every single thing, but like there's probably going to have to be a bit more check-ins and votes. I remember I did not go to the meetings, but I listened to them or watched them via YouTube because we had a Brown Act already there that went to the meetings. But one of the things that I was so frustrated by is I listened to the trustees in the Mountain View Wisdom School District. I was like, oh yeah, that was a good thing that they said. And as I'm driving or whatever I'm doing while I'm listening to the meetings, but nothing came down to a vote. It was just like, okay, they had their say, and then staff just did what they think what the board told them to do, or what they perceive it, but there was no direct vote to correlate to that.
And so just to respond just in the short term on that, everything can't go to a vote. But many things can. But the other part is direction. And that's just a protocol that people can learn. I had to learn it. Most leaders do, to just say, so what I'm hearing, because it's hard to parse out when you hear a lot of input from a lot of people, what I'm hearing is this is my direction. And then you put it in the minutes, and then it's something that's there. So it doesn't always have a vote. Votes are the most clear, but definitely seeking staff direction. And I see some of superintendents nodding their head. I think that is staff direction is a general way. And I know this is primarily for elected officials, but since we are talking about staff, I don't want to ignore any leaders who are staff members.
And to be clear, there's so the way school board meetings are organized in our agendas, there are discussion items and there are action items. So discussion items, there is no vote, but then often the board may give direction, which is what Dr. Bowers is talking about, versus when I view city council meetings, I see sometimes there's study sessions, which might be the equivalent of our discussion items. And then everything else is an action item. You guys vote on a lot of things. And so it's a structure of how the bodies actually operate differently that I think can be challenging. And then some of these things are closed session, right? And so we're not going to see what you all vote on in closed session unless it's something that's directly reportable to the public. And it's the same with school boards as well.
I mentioned, sorry, but just to follow up, I mentioned before when we had study sessions, sometimes they ran afoul of what we thought we told staff to do, but that's when we started doing like straw polls, and that helped narrow it to a clearer. What I just hope for is clarity, and then that accountability to it. So like if something happens, there's a breakdown. Not that I'm anticipating any breakdown. We're hoping for the best. But like, if there's something we can point to being like, this was the direction given, and then we can hash that through.
And just for the record, Lucas, I do like you, but and all the city council members here, but the ideas for achieving success. One thing I think about on the school district side, one of our most one of our challenging things we have to do regularly is teacher negotiations, and their data matters, right? And the data points for whether MVLA or Mount View Westman is like comparable districts, right? We look at comparable districts and here we've been talking about data. We haven't really talked about why the data matters here. With the, like the district is trying to figure, us, I know on our side, we're trying to figure out, how the city, what are the city's needs and expenditures when it comes to shoreline related expenses, right? And the city's interested in wanting to know, like, what are our needs, right? And enrollment and it's unique that we need to share this data because in other parts of the community, like taxes go to their formula to like how much the city gets and how much each school district gets and how much the hospital district, and everyone gets their part. So we don't need to share data because it's a regular tax district. But in Shoreline, all the tax funds go to the Shoreline community, which is the city, right? So in this situation, that's why the school districts are trying to share their data because, it's like, my daughter is sitting outside, which I apologize. That's why I've been running in and out. And my daughter will ask like, well, I want a new iPhone, and I'll say no. And then she'll go, well, like, I see that you buy a lot of books, so why can't you get me a new iPhone? Or like, I don't know if that analogy made any sense, but this idea that like, we're in a relationship where here, the Shoreline community, we don't control our regular tax dollars we would in any other part of Mount View, right? So we need to justify, or we need to show our needs to the city. And the city needs to explain why they can't give so much to us, right? Like I tell my daughter I can't get her an iPhone 15 because I'm a teacher and I have to buy these things or pay for her like music class or something like that. And I feel like we've broken down where the data is so important. I guess what I'm trying to say, the data is really important, but we're doing this shell game with data instead of like, we need to agree to data. Just like when we do teacher negotiations, like agreeing to comparables is so important. So like, whether it be the ad hoc or whether we hope the staff can do this, like we have to work with the same data. We have to get to agreement of what are genuinely the city's needs in the Shoreline community. And we, the school districts, need to acknowledge that. And the city needs to genuinely see like, what are our needs with all this upcoming growth and our needs to want to become the best schools for Mountain View. And right now, I just like, I hope that whether it be the ad hoc, somebody comes up with it, whether we outsource this to a third party to find the comparable data for us. But what we're doing right now of us generating reports and them generating reports, it neither acknowledges that data is important because it is, and we need to get to that common data. So I don't know if anyone here has some suggestions of how we get to there, but I feel like we need to get to a common agreement on city expenses Shoreline and what our enrollment needs are and school needs so that the ad hoc can have success.
I would kind of like to add on to what you've said. And I think in addition to that, we do need to decide on data. We have to have shared data that we can all say, okay, these are the numbers we're going to use. And we'll have to work that out. And I would imagine that it will be a sort of a bit of a patchwork quilt, and different agencies will, provide different numbers depending on, what their expertise. But another thing I think that is really important to consider is the time factor. We're not just talking about a formula that's going to be good for 2024. We are talking, the North Bay Shore Development Agreement is for 30 years. So there are a great many things that will change over 30 years. You don't have any new housing out there that has generated students yet, but there will be a time when you do. And then it'll be really important to make sure that the school can be built. But we don't necessarily need to pay for that this year, because those kids aren't there yet. On the other hand, sea level rise is something that is coming fast and furious. And we really need to get those sea level rise protections completed in the next 10 or 15 years. So I think that another thing we need to agree on not only is the data, but kind of what's the chronology of how these things are important and how we can make some decisions over time about when things become trigger points, because we don't really know what all of them are right now.
And there are many models of that include formulas and contingencies and things like that. And that would be something for the ad hoc committee to look at. We want to make sure we stay on this focus. Anything else? Yes. I'm sorry, I barely can look to my right, and I don't want to.
No worries. I said before that I think it's very difficult for us to all agree on data. And I think that is most relevant when it comes to the future, because we really don't know what's going to happen in the future. And so to choose one scenario and say, this is what's going to happen, and then we're going to base all the plans on that, I think a better approach would be to have scenarios of when things might happen and how much they might happen, and look at the implications of those different scenarios. I don't think we can pick one scenario. We certainly never do that in private business. It strikes me odd that government agencies would do that. I do want to comment on a couple other things that have been said. I really appreciate the focus on trust. I think that we need to work on that quite a bit. I think things have been said and done in the past that have broken that trust, and I don't think there's any silver bullets for fixing that quickly, but I think we need to figure out how we can have more trust among the different agencies. I also would like to, as was pointed out, sort of make the list of things we do agree on, and stop talking like we don't agree on them. I appreciate my colleague, Councilmember Ramirez, for being so open and candid about, let's talk about things that are hard to talk about. One of the things that I think the city is committed to and we have worked on in conjunction with others is an elementary school in the North Bay Shore area. There are 4 acres that we have said they're earmarked for an elementary school. No, I don't know how to convince people that we're serious about that. Do we need to write it down? What do we need to do? We've also talked about, similar to the agreement with the high school, the lease is $1 a year for the elementary school district. Yes, we might use it for something else in the meantime because we don't need that elementary school for, maybe 15, 20 years, depending upon what happens with the development in Shoreline. But I think we're all committed to that will be an elementary school in the North Bay Shore area. So how do we stop saying we're not going to have a school in the North Bay Shore area and therefore we need to make plans for all our other schools? That one is very frustrating for me, and it does erode at the trust because we feel like we've committed to that. I think it's going to be challenging for the ad hoc, but I appreciate those who have stepped up to do that. I do want to make sure the full bodies also have the opportunity every once in a while to weigh in on things. And yes, we have study sessions. Actually, it's in 2019 that we started doing the summary and the straw votes, not recently. And that was, again, thanks to Councilmember Ramirez, who said, sometimes not just the public, but the council members come away and go, what did we decide? What direction did we give staff? So we started summarizing it and taking votes. And I appreciate that process improvement. I appreciate all process improvements. And we have lots of opportunity here. So anyway, I guess my main message is, I think we really need to focus on getting back to trusting each other and negotiating from the perspective of we're in this together. We want many of the same things and we need to trust each other. Thanks.
I can't add anything to that. That was wonderful. So the next, we're just going to end with a little recap of where we've been. So the ad hoc committee has been established. We've convened this meeting. We were able to co-identify some norms and ground rules for how we're going to interact that could carry over to the ad hoc. We were able to identify some core values, bring in more, and kind of plant the seeds of a common vision. We've definitely not only identified hurdles, gave specific examples of things so that people weren't talking in just generalist terms, not to put anyone on the spot, but to let people take some ownership over what they might do differently in order to move forward. And we've proposed many ideas and considerations for moving forward. And anyway, I mean, my water glass is very light right now because I wasn't sure where we were going to go. And I appreciate the candor and the depth that everybody went. And I think you ended on that note there with we reinforced the commitment that we are going to co-labor together and work on a viable successor agreement because our community is counting on it and our kids need it too. So we'll look ahead to some of the next steps. We've heard the urgency of timelines and the cadence. And so next steps would be, and it's not for me to do, but there will be work to establish timelines and schedules for the ad hoc committee, because I think we've got a framework. Let's get it, let's make it happen. And mutually establish the scope and authority and their limitations, because as we heard, we want to have checkpoints. The rest of the elected officials are not necessarily there. So how is their joint messaging? How are their updates given? And if things get stuck, how do we course correct so that we don't just spin our wheels? Or was it spinning the mud in the tires? I think I've heard that before. Mutually establish these milestones and goals, and any other really burning next steps on the short term. We're getting close to 8 o'clock, so probably we need our dessert. If you can think of those, I know, or it could be long-term.
I think my only request, and I really appreciate Lucas specifically talking about, we are two different agencies, Mountain View Westman and MVLA. We are both school districts. We have different needs. And yet we both, because of the housing in North Bay Shore, need another school, and another high school is a much bigger ask. So we're going to have to work really hard together. I know it's a big ask, but I know the city has done amazing things. And I know that if we work together, we can make it happen. If we don't work together, but as far as I know, staff from MVLA and city staff, who I know are both amazing, have worked together well. If anyone has anything to say differently, I would like to hear it, because it's important for us to know as elected officials that our staff are not working well together, because honestly, Nellie, our amazing superintendent, basically runs our ship. We give her high-level direction and she's the one that makes it go. So we are not the ones who, we sit there and we say, please implement this thing, and she does it. So that is how a school board works. It's a little bit different than city council, where they have multiple employees. We have one employee, the superintendent.
Quick question for those on the ad hoc. Do they have the sense of the timeline of when they're meeting, and also kind of like a point where they wish to, like, not necessarily like reach a conclusion, but reach a point where they're ready to, like, whether it be report back to their agencies or report back to some joint body like this, like it's like a final deadline, like a first meeting and a final deadline. I feel like those are two benchmarks, right? It's like, when are you meeting first? And when is our last meeting, at least last meeting, to have some kind of try to reach a conclusion? Do members of the ad hoc know when that's happening?
I don't have dates for you, but roughly what we've talked about is first meeting would be soon, and we'd like to have it done by the end of 2024 is what I've heard people say. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'd say before the new trustees and school board and council members are sworn in after the November election in 2024.
I would heartily agree with that because as I'm a new trustee. There's an incredible amount of work involved in getting up to speed. So trying to get a new trustee and a new city council member up to speed on what's been going on, I think is a pretty heavy lift. And we are going to have 2 new city council members for sure, because we have 2 members terming out. So I would hate for that knowledge to be lost. So I really would like to have that deadline.
I would love to say best case scenario by June 30th. If we could get it done by June 30th, that would be even better.
So I'm not sure we're going to establish it tonight, but this is all great input. So we will stay tuned on that one, but thank you for the clarity. And then in closing, these are just some things for you to think about. What would success look like? Did anything surprise you? What resonated? Was there any aha moment where suddenly things clicked? What do you want to learn more about? What additional support would you need? And my favorite one of all, because again, it's about reflecting, not deflecting, is for each person to think, if this is our goal and this is our vision for our community and all 3 agencies to come together with something that's better than we could have imagined when we came in, what will you as an individual commit to doing to make it happen? Because it's very easy to say what they should do and they should do and this person should do, instead of what will I do differently? What will I do better or differently or in more depth? Or what will I continue to do if I'm already doing it? And that's a question only you can answer. Each of you as an individual, what will your part be in making that happen? Because people are expecting it. And if people want to share that one commitment, then it's super accountable. But you could share it privately as well. And then the last one, my final reflection. So today, I don't know if you learned something as concrete as maybe everyone had maybe hoped for, but hopefully you did learn from this experience. And more importantly, you're going to reflect on it and you will learn and take away even more than you thought. And my final quote, I'm a big quote person, sorry, but not really sorry. It's just kind of fun. But when I came into this community, everybody welcomed me and took a chance. Yet I heard there were fears. And so I would like to encourage you as you make these decisions and choices and the ad hoc committee gets working, have your choices reflect those hopes, those noble, grand hopes, not your worst fears, because then good things happen. And that's it.
Thank you.
Did I earn my dessert yet?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Bowers. And now for the end of the meeting, and I think we heard, I mean, I heard a few good positive things and a few tough things were said, and I think that's probably as much as we can expect out of a meeting like this. Now for the ad hoc committee. Anyway, the next step in the process, I'm just reading from a script, by the way. The next step in the process will be meetings of the ad hoc committee comprised of representatives of all 3 agencies. This committee will continue the work started tonight, enhancing working relationships between the agencies, getting deeper into sharing information and data relevant to the Education Enhancement Reserve Joint Powers Agreement, identifying shared and individual agency interests, and providing guidelines for staff level negotiation of the successor agreement. I want to thank the members of each agency who've agreed to serve on the ad hoc committee, which will be comprised of trustees Conley and Blakely from Mountain View Wisman, trustees Falaise and Corns from Mountain View Los Altos, and board members Showalter and Ramirez, in addition to myself from the Shoreline community. This meeting is adjourned at 8:14. Thank you, everyone, for coming all the way out here.